Hi, it's Bill Hansberry here. I want to have a little chat with anyone interested about a relic of reading assessment called running records. Running records serve as the primary assessment technique for PM benchmarking. Now, I use the term relic because running records and PM benchmarking are a past remnant of how we once thought the brain identifies unknown words. But since their inception, reading science has proven conclusively that the word identification approaches that running records assessed and encouraged are entirely wrong, and in fact promote damaging word attack approaches, particularly in struggling readers. Now, you might be a teacher in a school who still uses running records as part of its reading assessment. You might be a parent who's interested in reading assessment, or you could be a school or system leader who wants to better understand what evidence informed reading assessment looks like and why running records are not supported by the evidence. You might also be a teacher in an education jurisdiction who's pulling their hair out because funding is still tied to PM benchmarking. I want to leave you with no confusion. Running records have no place in evidence informed reading assessment because they promote word attack strategies that have been proven not to work and, in fact, are damaging to the reading progress of all students. To understand the problem with running records, we need to understand the disproven theory of reading that underpins them. The Venn diagram on the screen was what educators once accepted as what good readers do when they encounter an unknown word, and it turned out to be wrong. This model, commonly called the three queuing or multi queuing model, proposes that readers should employ three broad strategies to work out an unknown word. This places a strong emphasis on guessing a word from the meaning of the words surrounding it. Adults would cue a student with questions like, "What word would make sense here?" Or they would say to the student, "Skip the word, read on a little, and come back and see if you can work it out." And they'd use these approaches when a student got to a word that they could not identify. And only when these strategies failed to produce the correct word would a student be encouraged to look at the letters and attempt to decode the word. But usually, this would involve an emphasis on just the first and last letters in the word. So, decoding did kind of get a go in this approach, but only once contextual guessing had failed. What this produced was readers whose eyes would jump all over the text looking for meaning cues and guessing wildly. And this was not good news for any developing readers, but was particularly bad for readers with difficulties like dyslexia. Reading researcher Mark Seidenberg summarises quite nicely how the three queuing approach came to be embedded in reading instruction. So pause this video and have a look at what Mark Seidenberg has to say. So, as you can imagine, this three queuing model put phonics out of business for a long time. And countries that emphasised three queuing and the broader approaches that surrounded it, whole language and later balanced literacy instruction, paid the price in poor reading results. Well, it was students who ultimately paid the price. I need to make something clear. The research proves that readers should decode unknown words rather than guess. And this research has been around for about 30 years. Education, however, is notorious for ignoring research. This is not the fault of teachers. Responsibility lies essentially with particular education academics, very influential education academics. Yes, you heard me, academics, who refuse to change their thinking despite a compelling body of research. These academics still hold influential positions in many teacher training organisations. It galls me to tell you that today there are Australian universities that teach undergraduate teachers to use running records, and there are still schools that also use them. This is the motivation for this video. Research reveals that guessing unknown words from context, as well as from pictures, is what the weakest readers do. With students with developmental disorders of reading, guessing is actually a compensatory strategy. That an effective intervention will teach them what to do. Evidence informed intervention focuses on teaching students how letters map onto speech sounds, phonics, and then instructs students to use decoding as a word attack strategy. Don't think for a moment that we should be emphasizing phonic decoding only with students with reading difficulties. It's how we should be teaching all children to attack unknown words. So, how did the education establishment ever decide that getting kids to guess at words instead of sounding them out or decoding them was ever a good idea? Well, this is a story of a well meaning educator and educational leader and a logical fallacy. Anyone who's listened to Emily Hanford's Sold a Story podcast will be familiar with what I'm about to say. Dame Marie Clay was a hero of reading instruction around the world for many years. And Marie Clay was interested in why struggling readers struggled. Of course, a very worthy line of inquiry. She conducted a study involving a small sample size of 100 students at the University of Auckland. Marie Clay used observation to try to work out what strong readers did as they read and what weak readers did. The results probably won't surprise you. Strong readers were reading with ease, and they didn't seem to be doing as much decoding as the poorer readers. And it appeared that having to slowly sound out words might have been the thing that was making poor readers poor, because the more able readers weren't doing much decoding. So Marie Clay took this observation and formed this hypothesis that instead of decoding unknown words, stronger readers would look around and use linguistic clues like little linguistic detectives and work out the word from context. And they didn't seem to be paying much attention to the letters and words. And the weaker readers were slower and they were doing more decoding, which was laborious and painstaking and seemed to be impacting on their understanding of the text. So Dame Marie Clay drew the same assumption that you and I would have from these observations, that strong readers don't use decoding much and weak readers use decoding much more. And this laborious decoding is unnecessary and slows weaker readers down. So the logical fallacy was, well, if we could get poorer readers to focus more on guessing words from meaning, then they'll be more accurate and more fluent. So this was obviously a logical conclusion to draw from these observations, but it turned out to be a fallacy. Marie Clay thought that what she saw was decoding causing slow and inaccurate reading, and context based guessing causing faster and more accurate reading. And this was the logical fallacy that dominated reading instruction for decades to come. So pause the recording and just have a look at the summary of Marie Clay's findings there at the bottom. So while this view of reading was dominating the reading landscape in developed countries, a lady called Linnea Airy suspected that there might be something more at play when it comes to how readers store words for instant recognition. Linnea Airy wrote a paper titled Beginning Reading from a Psycholinguistic Perspective, Amalgamation of Word Identities. This was published in 1978, and Linnea Airy sent it to Ken Goodman, who was a bit of a bigwig in the reading scene. Now, Ken Goodman was not happy with Linnea Airy's emerging hypothesis, and he wrote in red pen, no, 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 all over the margins of her paper and sent it back to her. Now, study after study since and brain imaging technology have given us a much better insight into the reading brain. And although there are still many questions that need to be answered about the miracle of reading, we now know that the act of looking at a word and decoding it and knowing the meaning of that word is how we store words for instant recognition in our brain. And there's just no other way to become a fluent, comprehending reader. So Linnea Airy and her theory, which turned into orthographic mapping theory, turned out to be right. But assessing kids' reading using these contextual guessing techniques has cast a very long shadow. So, what you're looking at on screen there is a running record. Now, just take a moment to look at the MSV, meaning structure and visual codes on the corner there, and these are what an assessor uses to check student reading, and have a look at how they relate to that three queuing model of reading that has been utterly disproven. Now, this is the problem. This is teaching children how not to correctly identify unknown words. And for kids who have been taught to decode or phonically decode, using a word attack strategy like this can be really confusing. So, putting PM readers in front of all students, particularly our most vulnerable readers, not only causes them some distress and confusion, but also gives schools no valid data on a child's reading development. So, using running records and PM benchmarks is worse than ineffective, it's damaging. There are alternatives. Curriculum based measures of reading, like DIBBLES, are incredibly sensitive. And unlike running records, they're not subjective because they are normed across a large sample of students. And they also adhere to stringent administration protocols. These types of assessments show us exactly where a student's reading might be breaking down or where we might need to put more of an instructional focus. Most importantly, these are based on a large body of evidence, not a scientifically disproven model of how humans read. So, to not mince words, the use of running records and the promotion of any assessment or instructional practice based on three queuing is educational malpractice. So, I hope this has been helpful in building your understanding of why running records and PM benchmarks need to now become a relic of the past. Thanks for listening.